The poor widow took in 3 Apache orphans. 20 years later, one saved her from the gallows. The prairie winds carried whispers of sorrow when Mary Ellison buried her husband. She was left with little more than a weather-beaten shack on the edge of town and the strength of her own will. Poverty was her constant companion, but loneliness was the cruelest. She had no children of her own, and no kinfolk willing to lend a hand. It was a winter morning, bitter and gray, when she first saw them, 3 Apache children, thin as shadows, their dark eyes hollow with hunger. The town had turned its back on them, calling them savages, refusing to share bread or warmth. Mary had nothing, yet her heart refused to ignore their plight. She opened her door, let them in, and with trembling hands broke her last loaf of bread into 4 pieces. Ruthless whispers followed her from then on. "The widow's gone mad," they said. "Bringing in redskin orphans will be the end of her." But Mary stood firm. She patched their clothes, mended their spirits, and taught them words of English alongside the prayers she whispered each night. They grew, not as strangers, but as her children: Noka, fierce and watchful; Tala, gentle as the morning sun; and Chino, who carried laughter like a secret weapon against despair. The years passed hard but steady. Mary tilled the soil while the boys hunted rabbits and deer. Tala gathered herbs and learned healing from an old Apache woman who sometimes dared to visit under cover of night. Together they wove a family from scraps of kindness, enduring scorn from townsfolk who never forgave Mary's choice. When the boys grew into men, they carried the fire of both worlds within them, Apache pride and the tender lessons of a woman who gave when she had nothing. They left one by one, carving lives beyond the widow's door, but their bond to her remained unbroken. 2 decades later, Mary found herself standing before a noose. The years had weighed her body, but her spirit burned as fierce as the day she'd taken those children in. She was accused of theft and conspiracy against the very town that had never once embraced her. A wealthy rancher, greedy for her small plot of land, had spun lies thick enough to tighten a rope around her neck. The townsfolk gathered, hungry for spectacle, muttering that it was justice at last for the woman who had once chosen savages over her own kind. The gallows loomed, wood rough against the sky, and the sheriff's voice rang cold as iron. Yet just as the rope brushed her shoulder, a cry split the air. A rider thundered into town, tall and broad, his face painted with Apache marks, his eyes burning with fury. It was Noka. He leapt from his horse, rifle slung across his back, but it was not violence he carried, it was proof. In his hand, he held papers, testimonies gathered, and evidence of the rancher's theft and corruption. He spoke with a fire that silenced the mob, his words a shield forged from both law and loyalty. 20 years ago, Noka said, his voice like thunder rolling over the plain, "This woman saved 3 children when no one else would. She gave us life, dignity, and a name. Today I return that debt." The truth cut through lies sharper than any blade. Murmurs turned to shame, the sheriff's eyes lowered, and the rancher's schemes unraveled in the face of undeniable proof. The noose was lowered, the crowd dispersed, and Mary stood trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of love returned. Noka stepped to her side, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Mother," he whispered, a word she thought she'd never hear again, "you will never stand alone while we breathe." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked into the face of the boy she had once found starving in the cold. The prairie wind rose again, but this time it carried not sorrow, but the unbreakable bond of a family forged against all odds. The noose still swayed above her head when the sheriff ordered the rope down. The crowd, once eager for blood, shuffled their boots in the dirt, unable to meet Mary Ellison's eyes. She stood there trembling, her hands bound, the cold prairie wind stinging her skin. She had spent 20 years living on the edge of this town, never truly a part of it, never truly welcomed, and now, when they had finally decided to end her life, it was one of the very orphans she had taken in who had ridden through like thunder to save her. Noka's presence was more than flesh and bone. He carried with him the memory of 3 starving children who had been turned away by these very people. He carried the strength of the lessons Mary had poured into them. His deep voice had broken the spell of lies and turned the mob into cowards. For Mary, it was as though the past and present had collided in a single instant, and the boy she once fed with scraps of stale bread had returned as a warrior, a man carved by struggle and loyalty, to repay a debt the world would never understand. The sheriff muttered something under his breath, but he was quick to slice through her bonds. Mary rubbed her wrists, red and raw, the coarse rope having bitten her skin during the hours she had stood waiting for the end. The crowd dispersed slowly, their whispers fading into the distance, leaving only dust and silence behind. Noka stepped closer, towering over her, his eyes softening as they fell upon her face. "Mother," he said again, this time with the tenderness of a son long separated from home. Mary's lips trembled. She had dreamed of hearing that word, prayed for it in the lonely nights when the children had gone their own ways, but she had never imagined it would come at the edge of death. "You came back," she whispered. "I never left," Noka answered. His hand pressed lightly to her arm, steadying her as her knees threatened to give way. "You are my blood, even if it was not born from you. No rope, no law, no man will take you while I still live." The sheriff shifted uneasily. "The widow's free," he said gruffly, "but this town don't forget easy." He eyed Noka warily, the painted marks on his face a reminder of the Apache blood he carried. "You'd best take her home." Home. The word felt fragile, almost foreign. Mary's shack on the edge of town had long been more shelter against the wind than a place of peace. The townsfolk had always spit in her direction, muttered curses, refused to trade fair with her. She had endured because she knew endurance was the only choice. But after today, after the gallows, there was no denying that the ground beneath her feet was poisoned with the hatred of people who had never once shown her kindness. Noka's horse pawed at the dirt, restless as its rider held the reins steady. "Come," Noka said softly. "Let me take you from this place." Mary's body was weary, her spirit bruised, but she nodded. Her legs carried her slowly, almost uncertainly, toward the horse. Noka lifted her as if she were light as a feather, setting her gently upon the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arm came around her, protective, as he guided the horse forward. The townsfolk watched in silence, not one of them daring to stop him, though their eyes burned with unspoken words. The prairie stretched out before them, endless and wild, the wind sweeping away the dust of the gallows. For the first time in years, Mary felt the weight of fear lifting, replaced by something she had not known in so long: safety. Noka guided the horse into open country, away from the crooked streets and bitter faces, toward the horizon where freedom waited. They rode for hours, the sun sinking low, painting the sky with fire. Mary leaned back against him, exhaustion overtaking her. Her mind wandered to Tala and Chino, the other two she had once held close. She wondered if they were alive, if they remembered her, if the bond they had forged had endured the test of time. She wanted to ask Noka, but her voice was weak, her breath shallow with the toll of the day. Instead, she let the steady rhythm of the horse and the warmth of Noka's presence carry her into a restless half-sleep. When she awoke, they were by a fire in the shelter of a small grove of cottonwoods. Noka had laid out blankets, his movements precise, careful, as though every gesture was a vow of protection. He handed her a tin cup of warm broth, its steam curling into the night air. "You need strength," he said simply. Mary sipped slowly, the warmth spreading through her thin frame. "Where are we going?" she asked at last. "To where you belong," Noka answered. His eyes caught the firelight, burning with quiet intensity. "With us." Mary's breath caught. "With you." "With family," Noka said. "Tala waits in the hills. Chino. He rides with men who do not always walk the straight path, but his heart is yours. We will find him. You gave us life when we had none. Now it is our turn to give you back yours." Tears blurred her vision. She had thought herself forgotten, left behind as they had built their lives. Yet here was proof that the love she had sown in barren soil had taken root deeper than she had ever dared hope. Noka kept watch through the night, his silhouette tall and still against the fire. Mary drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by the gallows, soothed by the presence of the boy who had become her shield. She woke before dawn to the sound of horses. Panic rose in her chest, but Noka's calm voice stilled her fear. "It is Tala," he said, rising to greet the rider. From the mist emerged a woman on a painted horse, her hair braided long, her posture straight and proud. Tala dismounted with grace, her face breaking into a smile as she saw Mary. She rushed forward, falling to her knees beside her, taking Mary's hands in her own. "Mother," Tala whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "You live." Mary's heart swelled, her frail fingers clutching Tala's tightly. "Child, my child." They embraced, and for a moment, the years melted away. Mary remembered the girl who had gathered herbs by her side, who had listened intently to every word, who had smiled even when hunger gnawed at them. Now she was a woman, strong and radiant, carrying the wisdom of her people and the tenderness Mary had given her. The reunion was a balm to Mary's soul, yet it stirred another ache. "Chino," she whispered. "Where is Chino?" Noka's jaw tightened. "He drifts," he said carefully, "among men who deal in whiskey and guns. But he is not lost. I will bring him." And so the journey stretched onward. Together they moved deeper into the wilderness, where the land rolled in hills and the rivers sang songs older than memory. Mary grew stronger with each passing day, nourished not just by food but by the love of the children who had become her life's true legacy. They built a small camp, Tala teaching her the ways of herbs and healing, Noka scouting with the watchful eyes of a hawk. But Chino remained a shadow, a name spoken with both love and fear. Mary dreamed of him often, the boy with laughter in his eyes, who had once turned even their hunger into a game. She prayed he would return before the weight of the world dragged him beyond reach. It was weeks later, on a night when the moon hung heavy and red, that Noka rode back with another beside him. Chino dismounted with a swagger that tried to mask the weariness in his face. He had grown into a man hardened by the company he kept, his clothes worn, his hands calloused by work both honest and not. But when he saw Mary, all pretense fell away. "Ma," he said, his voice breaking. Mary rose slowly, her body frail but her spirit fierce. She went to him, her arms wrapping around him, pulling him close. "My boy," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You came back." Chino clung to her like a child once more, his shoulders shaking. "Always," he whispered, "always." The family was whole again, bound not by blood but by the love that had defied hatred, hunger, and time itself. And from that night forward, Mary knew the gallows had not been the end. It had been the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would no longer stand alone, where the children she had saved would now save her in return. The prairie stretched before them, wild and untamed, but together they walked into it, carrying with them a bond stronger than any rope, stronger than any hatred, stronger than death itself. The fire crackled low, sending sparks into the cool night air as Mary sat between Tala and Chino, her frail hands resting in theirs. Noka sat slightly apart, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes, but his eyes never left them. The silence was heavy, filled with emotions unspoken. Chino's face bore the wear of hard living. His eyes, once bright with mischief, now carried shadows. His shoulders were broader, his voice rougher, but when Mary looked at him, she saw only the boy who had once pressed wildflowers into her hands, saying they were fancy gifts, fit for a queen. "You've walked dark roads," Mary said softly, her voice steady though her heart ached. "But you are here now. That is what matters." Chino lowered his gaze. "I don't deserve to sit by your fire." Mary cupped his cheek with her thin hand. "You deserved love the day I found you. You deserve it still." Tala leaned closer. "You've been lost, brother. But no one is ever too lost for family." The crackle of the fire was the only sound for a long while. Finally, Chino exhaled, the weight of years pressing out of his chest. "I've done things," he said quietly. "Things I can't take back. I've ridden with men who'd sell their souls for whiskey. I've carried guns for hire. I've seen blood spilled for coins not worth the metal." His voice cracked. "And all the while, I thought of you, Ma. I thought of how you'd look at me if you knew." Mary's eyes shone with tears, but her voice was firm. "Then stop thinking of what I would see and start living so you can hold your head high. The past is ashes. It's what you build now that matters." Chino swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. He reached for her hand again, gripping it as if he feared she might vanish. Noka finally spoke, his voice deep, steady. "There is no shame in falling, only in refusing to rise. You are my brother. If you carry blood on your hands, then let it be washed by the life we make from here." Chino looked at him, then at Tala, and finally at Mary. The laughter that once lived in him flickered faintly in his eyes, as if daring to return. For several days, they lived together in a fragile peace, hunting, cooking over open flames, and sharing stories of the years gone by. Mary felt life returning to her bones, not through food or rest, but through love. She had lived 20 years in exile from her own kind, treated as an outcast, yet here she sat, surrounded by the children who had become her heart. But the world beyond their fire did not forget. Word of Mary's escape spread back to town. The rancher whose lies had nearly hanged her nursed his pride like a festering wound. He had lost face before the entire community, his schemes undone by an Apache orphan turned warrior. Men like him did not forgive. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the horizon, Noka returned from a scouting ride with his jaw set tight. "They're coming," he said simply. Tala stiffened. "How many?" "Half a dozen men, maybe more," Noka answered. "Guns on their hips. They ride with the rancher at their head." Mary's stomach turned cold. "They mean to finish what the gallows failed." Chino rose, his hand falling instinctively to the pistol at his side. "Then let them try." "No," Mary said sharply, surprising even herself. "Not with blood." Noka's gaze softened, but his voice remained resolute. "They will not harm you. Not while we breathe." That night, sleep was restless. Mary prayed by the dying embers of the fire, her lips moving in a whisper only heaven could hear. She did not pray for vengeance, nor even for deliverance. She prayed for the strength to endure, the strength to protect her children from losing themselves to violence. Dawn came, pale and merciless. The sound of hoofbeats thundered through the valley, stirring birds into the air. The rancher and his men rode hard, dust trailing behind them. They stopped a stone's throw from the camp, rifles slung across their saddles, sneers twisting their faces. Well, the rancher drawled, his voice oily with malice. "The widow and her little brood of redskins. Thought you could cheat the rope, did you?" Mary stood tall, though her body trembled. She stepped forward, placing herself between the men and her children. "I've done no wrong," she said, her voice clear. "You tried to steal what wasn't yours, and you failed. That should be the end of it." The rancher's lip curled. "This land ain't yours, widow. It belongs to men who know how to use it." He spat in the dirt. "And you think hiding behind half-breeds will save you?" Before Mary could answer, Noka stepped forward, towering, his presence radiating danger. "These are not threats you understand," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Leave, now." The rancher laughed, but it was brittle, forced. "Or what? You'll scalp us." His men chuckled nervously, their hands twitching near their guns. Chino moved to Mary's side, his pistol already drawn, steady as stone. "No," he said, "but I'll put you in the ground if you take one more step." The standoff stretched, the air heavy with tension. Tala slipped behind Mary, her hand resting on a pouch of herbs and powder burn if the fight turned ugly. But Mary lifted her hand, her voice cutting through the moment like a blade. "Enough." The men sneered, but Mary's eyes burned with something fiercer than steel. "You call me poor, you call me weak, you call me a fool. But I have more than you ever will. I have children who would lay down their lives for me. And you," she pointed at the rancher. "You have only hate. Hate will not save you when the earth claims your bones." The rancher's sneer faltered. For a heartbeat, silence hung. Then Noka stepped forward another pace, his rifle raised, his voice cold as winter. "This is your only warning. Leave her be, or by nightfall, your men will dig more graves than you can count." The men shifted uneasily, their bravado wilting under Noka's gaze. One muttered, "It ain't worth it, boss." Another spat but didn't move forward. The rancher's face twisted with fury, but he knew. He saw the fire in Noka's eyes, the steadiness of Chino's aim, the calm readiness of Tala, and the unshakable strength of Mary standing before them. He yanked his reins, turning his horse sharply. "This ain't over, widow," he spat. "Not by a long shot." They rode away in a storm of dust, but Mary knew he spoke truth. It was not over. That night, the family sat in silence by the fire. The air was thick with the weight of what had almost happened, of what might yet come. Mary reached for each of their hands in turn. "You are my heart," she said softly. "All of you. If they come again, if they strike me down, promise me you'll lie. Promise me you won't let hate devour you the way it has them." Noka's hand closed firmly over hers. "We promise," he said. Tala nodded, her eyes wet with unshed tears. Chino's grip trembled, but his voice was steady. "I swear it, Ma." And in that moment, Mary felt something she had not known since the day she buried her husband. She felt peace. The prairie wind howled through the night, carrying with it the echoes of the gallows, the whispers of hate, and the unbreakable vow of a family forged not by blood, but by love stronger than any rope, any lie, any gallows the world could build. The prairie winds carried whispers of sorrow when Mary Ellison buried her husband. She stood alone beside the grave, her black dress whipped by the cold, the townsfolk offering little more than stiff nods before drifting back to their own lives. She was left with a weather-beaten shack on the edge of town, a few acres of soil too rocky to yield much, and a heart too stubborn to quit. Poverty had long been her companion, but now loneliness sharpened its claws. It was in that loneliness that she first saw them, 3 children, thin as shadows, their dark eyes hollow with hunger. Apache orphans, no older than 9, abandoned after their people had been driven and broken by raids. The town spat on them, called them savages, and turned them away from every door. Mary had little, but her heart refused to harden. She opened her door, ushered them inside, and with trembling hands broke her last loaf of bread into 4 pieces. From that day, her fate changed. Whispers followed her through the streets. The widow's gone mad. Taking in redskins will be the end of her. She endured the scorn. She patched the children's clothes with scraps, mended their spirits with patience, and taught them English words beside the prayers she murmured each night. They grew as her own. Noka, fierce and watchful, who carried silence like a shield. Tala, gentle and curious, who collected herbs and whispered to the wind. And Chino, full of restless laughter, who found games even in hunger. They lived through winters by sharing warmth beneath patched quilts, through summers by gathering berries and chasing rabbits across the hills. The townsfolk never forgave Mary's choice, selling to her only at higher prices, mocking her behind her back. Yet the children grew strong. They carried the fire of 2 worlds within them, Apache blood and the lessons of love from the widow who had chosen them when no one else would. Years passed, and the orphans became adults. One by one, they left the shack to carve their own lives, though they never forgot her. Mary aged into frailty, her hands lined, her hair white, but her spirit burned steady. She tended her land alone, enduring the bitterness of neighbors who wished she would vanish. Then, 20 years after she had opened her door, her enemies struck. A wealthy rancher, greedy for her small plot, spun lies thick enough to coil a rope around her neck. They accused her of theft, of conspiring with outlaws, of poisoning wells. The evidence was smoke, yet the townsfolk, who had always seen her as an outsider, hungered to be rid of her. On a gray morning, they dragged her to the gallows. The crowd gathered, muttering with cruel anticipation. The sheriff read the charges with a voice as cold as iron. Mary stood tall despite her trembling knees, her wrists bound, her breath shallow. She had lived a life of sacrifice, and now it seemed she would die branded as a criminal. But as the hangman tightened the noose, a cry split the air. A rider thundered into town, his horse kicking up clouds of dust. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face marked with Apache paint, his eyes burning with fury. Noka, he leapt down, rifle across his back, and strode forward with the weight of a storm. In his hand were papers and testimonies, proof of the rancher's theft and deceit. His voice boomed like thunder as he faced the mob. 20 years ago, Noka roared, this woman saved 3 starving children when no one else would. She gave us life, dignity, and hope. Today I return that debt. The crowd fell silent. The sheriff hesitated, then cut her bonds. The noose swung empty as the rancher's lies unraveled. Noka's evidence left no doubt, and Mary Ellison was freed. She wept as Noka placed his hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Mother." It was a word she had longed to hear for decades, and now it came at the very edge of death. Noka carried her from the town on horseback, away from the bitter stares, into the open country. For the first time in years, Mary felt safe. By firelight, Noka told her the truth. Tala lived in the hills as a healer, and Chino drifted with rough men who dealt in whiskey and guns, but his heart had never let go of her. "We are family still," Noka promised. "And now, you will not stand alone." Days later, Tala arrived, riding a painted horse, her face radiant with recognition. She fell to her knees before Mary, clutching her hands. "Mother," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. Mary's heart swelled as the girl she had once taught to mix herbs and whisper prayers now stood before her as a woman strong and wise. Only Chino remained. Noka rode into the wilderness to find him. When he returned weeks later, a weary figure rode beside him. Chino dismounted with a swagger, but his eyes betrayed shame. "Ma," he said, voice breaking. "I've done things I can't take back." Mary touched his cheek. "Then do better now. The past is ashes. What matters is what you build from here." Chino wept in her arms, the boy inside the hardened man breaking free at last. For a time, they lived in fragile peace, building a small camp, hunting, and sharing stories. Mary felt years melt away in their laughter. But the world had not forgotten. The rancher, humiliated in town, rode against them with hired guns. At dawn, they arrived, rifles glinting. "Thought you could cheat the rope, widow," he sneered. "This time, no Apache trick will save you." Mary stepped forward, frail yet unshaken. "You call me poor, you call me foolish, but I have more than you ever will. I have children who would die for me. You have only hate." Noka stood beside her, rifle raised. Chino's pistol gleamed steady in his grip. Tala clutched her pouch of herbs, ready to blind the first man who fired. The rancher sneered, but his men hesitated. They saw in Noka's eyes the fire of a warrior, in Chino's stance the steadiness of death, in Tala's calm the power of a healer unafraid. They saw in Mary not weakness, but strength greater than their guns. "Leave," Noka growled, "or by nightfall you'll dig graves for every man here." Fear broke the rancher's arrogance. He spat in the dirt, turned his horse, and rode away. His men followed, muttering that it wasn't worth it. The threat was gone, for now. That night, as firelight danced across their faces, Mary took her children's hands. "Promise me," she said, "that if they ever come again, you'll live. Don't let hate consume you as it has them." They swore it. Noka's grip was firm, Tala's gentle, Chino's trembling but true. And Mary smiled, tears glistening. For she knew then that the gallows had not been the end. It had been the turning point. She had saved them once, and now they had saved her. As the prairie wind howled through the night, carrying away the dust of old hatred, Mary Ellison rested her head on her children's shoulders. She had been a poor widow, but in giving love, she had sown a legacy richer than gold. No rope could erase it, no lies could destroy it, no enemy could break it. When her time came years later, it was not at the end of a rope, nor alone in a shack despised by neighbors. It was in the arms of the 3 children she had once taken in, their voices whispering the words she had longed to hear. "Mother." And with that, she passed into peace, leaving behind not the bitterness of the gallows, but the unshakable truth that love, when given freely, can outlive hatred, outlast cruelty, and even cheat death itself.